Good afternoon, brothers, and welcome to the beginning of a week of celebration of Phi Kappa Psi Founders Day and the first of our two panels, a panel on higher education. I'm joined here today by two members of the higher education and fraternal community. First, Brother Andrew Jones, who serves as the Vice President for Student Development and Dean of Students for Franklin College, and Judd Horace, the President and CEO of the North American Interfraternity Conference. We're going to go ahead and get things started out. So what I'm going to do to move things forward is ask both of our guests today to take a little bit of time to introduce themselves, tell them a little bit about who they are and what their role is. So we're going to first go with Brother Andrew Jones from Franklin College. Thanks for joining us, Brother Jones, and I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Jones. As Ron said, I'm the Vice President for Student Development and Dean of Students at Franklin College, which is a residential liberal arts institution just south of Indianapolis. I did my undergraduate work at Butler University, where I joined Phi Psi in '96. And I've been working in higher education for the last 20 years since that time. I've worked mostly at small private institutions, residential liberal arts colleges. And so I bring that perspective to our conversation today.
Thank you, Andrew. And next, Judd Horace.
Hello, everyone. I'm Judson Horace. I'm the President and CEO of the North American Interfraternity Conference. It's a trade association that represents 58 international and national men's fraternities, including Phi Kappa Psi. I'm a member of Beta Theta Pi. I went to Iowa State University, graduated in 1997, went to work for Beta and right out of college, and then transitioned in 2015 to this role with the NIC. And I'm really happy to be with you all today.
Wonderful. Thank you both for taking time to be with us, and we're just going to get it started. So I'm going to ask Judd and Andrew some questions, and you guys can take turns, and some of the questions you may feel that you don't want to answer, so please don't feel like you're required to answer all the questions as we go through this. But to start out, obviously, the thing that's probably on most of our minds right now is COVID and the pandemic and getting through the circumstances that we're in. So my first question to both of you is, how do you feel the campuses, our campuses will rebound from the impact that COVID has had on the way our students experience life on campus, and especially from the standpoint of their academic experience and social life?
That's a big question. Yeah, I think that's what's on everyone's minds as we think about moving forward. So from my perspective, it's been a bit of a kind of crisis management and maintenance plan for the last several months as we have adapted to the challenges of the day related to the health and safety of students on campus, which I think is everyone's number one priority. The mitigation strategies and policies and procedures that campuses have had to put into place have definitely impacted the experience that students have while they're on campus. So I think you're right to ask the question, how will campuses move forward? How will things look different for students in new environments that we move forward in after pandemic and COVID times? So, I think institutions have laid the groundwork during this period for what the future might look like. I think a lot of institutions are going to capitalize on the creativity they had to leverage during this time period to figure out new ways to reach students and to really capitalize on different ways of reaching out, different ways of engaging. Everyone's excited to return to more in-person, engaging kinds of interactions, especially our Greek students, I think in particular. So we're all anxious for that opportunity. And I think it will be interesting to see how it plays out, how students respond to institutions as they advance and think about ways to engage in the future.
Yeah, Ron, I think there's a couple things from my perspective people need to understand. The The first is, largely speaking, COVID from a health perspective for college students hasn't been overly impactful to, I mean, most of the cases, we've had thousands of cases of fraternity men contracted, and most have been asymptomatic or very light cases. We've really had to focus on making sure that they don't create community spread to faculty, other members of the community. That's really, when I say that's the COVID piece that people have to understand. But the thing that people don't understand is, while college students may be faring well against COVID, the mental health and crisis going on right now of students feeling lonely and isolated and depressed is at an all-time high. The number of suicide issues that college students are facing, that fraternities and sororities are facing, I just find it really very troubling. And what is also really important, and I think why fraternity has thrived even in the middle of this, is young men want to find a place of home when they get to college, and they want to find a brotherhood. They want to find connection that fraternity provides. There's other ways to get it, but I think fraternity helps provide that. You know, research just came out, produced by the University of Tennessee, looked at the Michigan Mental Health Study, which is a study of college students' mental health. And fraternity men versus non-fraternity men. So fraternity men had less anxiety, less depression levels. They knew how to cope with their mental health challenges better than non-fraternity men. And so I think at this moment, fraternity has been very relevant to help our students get through the crisis. Now, the other challenge I think we're going to have is, as far as fraternities go for this next period, is how do we pivot out of a virtual experience back to a safe experience when we get to be in person? I've heard people say after the Spanish flu, it was the roaring 20s. And so I think we're going to really have to be focused on that in the fall. So that's the immediate needs, but I could go on then for hours where I think I'm not sure that 10 years from now, college students will be going to a residential 4-year experience. And if that is true, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 1 year, and maybe it's hybrid with online, and maybe it's hybrid with a lot of different schools you could go to. If that's true, then fraternities are going to have to reinvent their basic intake membership business model pretty quickly. And I've used the example, Disney for so long relied on their parks for revenue and the way that they operated. And now Disney Plus is experiencing Disney, but it's not about going to a park. So I think in many ways, fraternities are going to be faced with that same type of question of how do you have human brotherhood, connection, feeling, but maybe it's not tied to Iowa State. Maybe it's tied to just Beta Theta Pi or Phi Psi in a different space that's created maybe by cities, by regions, by neighborhoods. We're going to have to reinvent ourselves fairly quickly here.
Thanks, Jen. And I think those are both extremely big points on the desire of students to really be engaged with one another, and really the insight that the pandemic has probably provided us on some things that maybe we weren't putting enough emphasis on in looking at the future of higher education. So, and maybe you guys can give me a little bit based on that conversation we just had on how the pandemic has impacted student organizations and fraternities where we are today, from a membership standpoint, from the ability to engage in their missions and what they're trying to do. What impact has the pandemic had?
Sure, I can dive in and say, I think, so we dealt with a lot of initial frustration, disappointment about what fraternity life was going to look like during this time period. And so that's the obvious downside. There are guest limitations at the houses. When someone becomes positive with COVID and then their roommates or suite mates have to be quarantined, it just creates all kinds of difficulties that students didn't sign up for. This is not the experience that they thought they were going to have. The upside of that, I think, is that the circumstances have required institutions to be creative, to think about how they can still engage the mission of their organization without kind of being burdened maybe by the idea of this organization existing as a physical location or as a physical entity, so much as connections that the brotherhood can foster and create. And so I think really living into what are our values, how can we still sort of embody the mission that we espouse and enact that in our daily actions, has allowed them to think differently about their fraternity and what kind of organization they want to be, which I think could have really positive implications for the future, and maybe help us avoid some of the roaring 20s phenomenon that Judd referenced as we return to more normal practices in the fall.
Ron, I'd say a trend I've seen is it really comes down to leadership. It really does, the students. So we've had so many stories of chapters that pivoted and figured out how to exist in COVID and figured out how to recruit and have brotherhood and make it work and are thriving, haven't lost members, in some cases bigger. And then we've had other chapters that are just basically like, I don't want to do anything. I'm just going to hibernate my chapter for 12 months and hope it all goes away. Right. So literally you can watch the joining rates of the differences and it all comes down to local attitude. The big differentiator that used to be is like, did you have a good house? And did you have alumni support? And, what was your social calendar like? And how well known were you on campus? And a lot of that stuff didn't matter in COVID. It really mattered how much the students were able to pivot and learn how to grow and do things differently. And the more flexible they were, the more hard work they put in, the more results they saw. So I think it's been a real showing of what initiative can do for students who want to embrace, as well as our real weakness if students don't want to respond. So in that way, it's been very clear. And I think that's going to play out a lot more after COVID. You're going to see even more of that.
Wonderful. And as leaders of two institutions that I would say are embedded in tradition, I think we talk about a lot about housing, both on the campus end from a residence hall standpoint and on the fraternity end of fraternity housing. Have either of you heard discussions go in a different direction regarding what our vision and future for housing is for our organizations and institutions based on what we've gone through over the past 12 months?
So we've actually experienced, and obviously this is just one example at a particular institution, we expected to see occupancy in our residence halls and fraternities decline significantly. We expected to see students requesting single occupancy rooms. Given the size of our institution and the facilities that we have, we were not able to offer single occupancy rooms to students sort of as a matter of course, like many institutions have attempted to do as a mitigation strategy. But we expected to see requests for those singles increase exponentially. We expected to see requests for housing exceptions to increase exponentially. And we actually had our largest occupancy in the last 5 years this fall, really bucking the trends that we expected to see. And I know that's probably not the case at every institution, but I think it's much more common than anyone anticipated the case might be. I think it really speaks to what we've been talking about, which is that longing for connection and engagement and a sense of community that's really led students to the idea that if they can't have the exact experience they thought they might get, if they can't be in person for things that they're accustomed to being in person for, then they want what connections and what in-person interactions they can have. And if that's going to be in the residence hall or in a Greek facility, then that's what they want. Whether that continues to bear out over the coming years, I think remains to be seen. But I really think right now, as they're coming to realize some of the things that they once took for granted and how much they now appreciate that they, when it's become more scarce, I think we're really seeing that sense for connection and engagement is going to persist, at least in terms of housing for the next several semesters.
Yeah, Ron, I think my perspective, there's two things. I think it's going to be all things local. So, based on what type of school you are, based on your requirements, based on do you traditionally have fraternity houses, not. I mean, it's just going to be all over the place. I do think technology is going to make it easier for students to continue to meet each other and to congregate in ways that are far more efficient than if you just only had to rely on a chapter house. Now, keep in mind, I moved in my first day of my freshman year at Iowa State, and I lived in the chapter house all 4 years. So I love it. I'm a huge fan of it, and I donate to my local house corporation because I still believe in it for the Iowa State experience. But I would say that's going to be a question that's going to really change. I do think a fundamental question in time is going to play out as a parent. I've got a freshman in high school and I've got a sixth grader. If my son or daughter have a good option to get a great education, but I only need to pay 2 or 3 years of them going to live on campus, I think the buying value question will come more and more into play as virtual becomes more and more legitimate form of education for the career development that it's supposed to be. And so I think fraternity is going to have to be prepared for that. I think a basic value question of dollars is going to come into play more and more as we move down the road. But the question of fraternity is not going to change. And I literally got this tweet from Pope Francis as we're on the session. I'm just going to read it for you all. This is Pope Francis put this out today. His view, he says, he uses fraternity is the true cure for the pandemic and the many evils that have affected us, along with vaccines, fraternity, and hope, as it were, the medicine we need in today's world. Now, the Pope thinks of fraternity in a different way, maybe in a more traditional way of what fraternity is, which is coming together and doing things together. He's probably not talking about American college fraternities, but nonetheless, it's the same concept. It's brotherhood, it's connection, it's a feeling of support, of mutual, that we're in this together. That type of thing will transcend whether we're online with students, whether we are in chapter houses, or whether we go to Purdue University for 4 years. I think that's all going to be just things that fraternity are going to have to adjust to, but young men will still want to bond with each other.
Thanks, Judd. And that's a wonderful segue into our next topic. One of the things that the pandemic has really brought to light is technology. And I think for a lot of people, the realization of how far we've come, and for those institutions and organizations that had not come very far, how far they've probably come in the past 12 months, just based on requirements and the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So how do you guys think technology has most impacted your industries and the student engagement with one another and with our institutions?
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating and really sort of amazing to watch this all unfold and to observe the ways that institutions and individuals have responded to the needs of the day. For collective organizations, individual faculty members to respond in a matter of days to pivot and put what used to be in-person content in a way that's deliverable and meaningful through a virtual modality it's really remarkable, especially in some areas like music or physical science, where you're just used to being able to manipulate things and interact with people. And to find creative solutions to still make a meaningful experience for students has really been remarkable to watch. I think it's a testament to sort of what we do at a liberal arts in a liberal arts education, which is foster those creative thinking, critical thinking skills, problem solving strategies that allow people to respond in these kinds of ways. So it's been really kind of cool to see that all unfold. In terms of leveraging technology and how that's impacted the student experience, I think a lot of students were frankly ill prepared to respond to that change in modality, and I don't put that burden on the students. I think that's the quickness with which everyone had to respond. There wasn't really time to go through pedagogical strategies on how to teach and learn virtually if that's not been the method that you're accustomed to. So I think it's been a huge transition and a huge shift for students. Most folks now, in recent semesters have returned more to in-person or hybrid kinds of experiences, which I think is getting back to a place that's more in most people's comfort zones. As far as engagement, I think it's been really, again, sort of interesting to watch how student affairs organizations and individual student organizations have still managed to maintain connection and reach out and engage folks despite maybe less than desirable sorts of circumstances or environments. Our chaplain actually during this process started a practice with faculty and staff who she noticed were reaching out to her saying, I miss that in-person connection. I miss that opportunity to, pass someone on the quad and have an informal conversation. And she started a group or started a practice where you could sign up to be assigned a person to get to know on campus, to have a 30-minute Zoom conversation with someone, whether you knew them or not. She would pair people up each month. And so you'd know by the end of the semester, you would have had 4 or 5 of these conversations with folks. And they've been wildly successful. Just to have that opportunity to be able to build that connection, to have a sense of common purpose, to talk about the things that are going on has been really valuable. So much so that she asked the question, should we institute this with students? And we all sort of thought, students aren't going to want to randomly connect with some other person that they don't know. They're not going to sign up for more time online, another virtual experience. And we were wrong. She tried it and found that students were clamoring for that opportunity, especially our first year students who had an atypical introduction and orientation to the college, really needing and reaching out for that opportunity to get to know one another and to connect with each other and with the institution more broadly. So technology in a lot of ways has kind of been a godsend through this process. It's the way that we've been able to keep things going, as much as we are all sort of lamenting one more meeting online or one more Zoom session. The fatigue is real, but without it, I think we would have been much worse off than we have been with it.
Nothing's ever going to replace hanging out with your brothers. Nothing's ever going to replace that in person fully. But technology sure helps make the running a fraternity more efficient and effective. I'll give you some examples. This picture behind me, fraternity brothers, alumni reunions on Zoom have just proliferated everywhere. All of a sudden, it's easy to meet all of your brothers again, and you don't have to go to Iowa State or Ames to have a reunion. You can do it on Zoom. I've been a part of 5 IFC meetings since January. I mean, the ability for me just to be a part of an IFC, and it's not like we're all meeting now across the country with chapter leaders and IFC leaders so easily. We hosted our largest educational academy by 5-fold this year. Instead of flying somewhere in person, it's so much more efficient to do it over Zoom. And in the end, the students don't want to hear me speak. They just want to get into cohorts of people from their same areas, types of school, and talk about how they do it on their campus. So I tell everyone it's not the same, but you have to understand, my son who's in 6th grade enjoys playing Xbox in his room on Friday nights with 4 of his buddies, and they're all in their house, and they call that a sleepover till 3 a.m. I'm not saying it's the same, but I'm saying that's how they're growing up. And so I think we need to embrace this. I think foundations can raise more money because they can do more donor visits. I think alums can be more connected. I think you can volunteer now. You don't have to live in the town of the college. You can volunteer from anywhere. The students are more efficient in getting together. So the business and operations of fraternity is there, but we won't get rid of the kind of brotherhood bonding.
Great. And I think we're able to talk a lot about the positives of technology and how it's really given us an opportunity to continue to engage. Might you both be able to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that have surfaced with technology as we've entered into pretty much what's been a full technology operation within fraternities on campus, and how we might consider overcoming some of those challenges?
Adam, do you mind if I go first on this one?
Please.
Right. So This was before the pandemic. I want to be clear. Meeting and operating via Zoom and using tools to connect in a meaningful way are good. All of the research says social media for our students is very bad for their mental health, right? So there's a total, when I use the word technology, I don't mean the things that are driving the mental health issue. I mean, it's very clear that adoption of the smartphone and adoption of social media platforms, the younger the age, the higher the likelihood of depression and anxiety in those students. So it is very clear. So I don't see technology as helping there. I see technology I've talked about through Zoom of supplementing face-to-face interaction as positive. But I think there are some real downsides to social media that were before the pandemic and are amplified even more right now.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. We've seen, again, as a local example, need for counseling services increase fairly significantly, and that's not unique to our institution. All of the literature is sort of talking about the mental health crisis that's happening, especially in traditional 18 to 22-year-olds. That's sort of the time when a lot of mental health concerns sort of come to the surface anyway, and then to be exacerbated by some of the social media trends that Judd referenced. It really is, it's an alarming sort of unintended consequence of our new digital interactions that seem to really permeate a lot of what's going on, especially with that age group and younger. So I think mental health and is absolutely one of the downsides to technology. And that comes from all the pressures that I think people feel as a result of the feeds that they see and the sort of curated existence that people project on their social media platforms. And then also the lack of that face-to-face interpersonal connection and really meaningful engagement with another individual that creates that sense of isolation, that sense of feeling less than or different from, that really can impact a young person's mental health.
Great, thanks. And I think as we continue to move forward, obviously we see trends and technology impacting our industries and new realizations coming about. One thing that has surprised me most through the pandemic has been the buy-in from our alumni and our ability to be able to better communicate with them, as conference calls used to be a challenge. And now we're able to actually do face-to-face interactions with people that were at some time struggling to get on conference calls with one another. So we're really excited about the progress that we've made on that end. One of the things that we've all gone through over the past year, and I've been fortunate as a result to work with the NIC on, is looking at diversity within our organizations, within the campus community, and within fraternities. And so I was hoping maybe for both of you, you could just talk a little bit about the transformation and what you've seen happen from a diversity perspective in your industries. It doesn't have to be limited to this year, but I think over the bigger span of time, from when you first started and got into this up to where we are now.
Well, so there's a couple things to keep in mind about when I'm talking with alums is today's student is so much better versed and knowledgeable and open to diversity, equity, and inclusion than previous generations. I just find that they're able to not only understand it, but also advocate strongly for it. And I think in many ways we try to keep up with how fast it is moving. It's critical for the future of fraternities that we become more diverse, equity, and inclusion. I mean, that's where society's going. That's where American higher education is going. That's frankly our membership base will become more and more. How do we attract more and more diverse populations to be a part of the fraternity experience? And then the other side that isn't talked about a lot, but I think is very important, is we have a lot of multicultural fraternities that have emerged in the last 20 years that we represent and advocate for. Our historically Black fraternities are very strong in membership. Our Asian fraternities, our Latino fraternities, those have really grown in the last couple of decades. And I see that continuing to emerge as young men look to find a place and home. And so I think we're going to become more blended in many ways with traditional IFC fraternities. And then I also think the emergence of multiculturals is going to just continue to grow.
Yeah. So I think enacting and espousing values of diversity, equity, and inclusion are imperative. It's a fundamental part of a higher education. If the last year or two have taught us anything about our social interactions and our political environment, it's that we have to have a group of young people who are able and willing to talk across difference. And I think we do that by exposing students to folks with different experiences and perspectives and backgrounds, whether that's racial, ethnic backgrounds, sexuality, religion, ability. All of those things really play into empathy and understanding and a development of our own identities. So I think that's crucial to the higher education process in general. I think it's also fundamental to our survival as institutions and organizations. The demography of college-bound students is changing, and we need to be prepared, as whether it's fraternity organizations or institutions of higher education, to meet the needs of the students who will be attending institutions of higher education. And increasingly, that's going to be Black students and Latinx students and first-generation college students. So we really need to be cognizant and mindful and intentional in building up structures of support that will make those students feel welcome, included, celebrated, and supported as they go through the process. So it's a moral imperative, but it's also a matter of survival.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we're coming up on the end of our panel time, but I did want to take time just to ask you both one more question in wrapping up, and that's as we look to the future of higher education, of fraternity, what are some things that you think maybe we should be thinking about or looking towards that maybe have fallen by the wayside or that we're not considering right now? Both, obviously, our audience right now is a lot of our undergraduates and alumni volunteers and members. But what do you think maybe is in our blind spot or in a place that we could give a little bit more attention to as we look forward?
I think maybe the first thing that pops to mind, both for institutions of higher education and for fraternal organizations, is that they're both really steeped in a sense of tradition and history and pride, which I think is important in perpetuating the values and the missions of those organizations. I think it's going to be crucial for all of us to figure out how to balance that sense of history and tradition with innovation and flexibility and being nimble and responsive to external environments and conditions. That's going to be necessary for survival. I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we need to be creative and flexible in solving problems and in responding to the needs of the moment. And our histories can help us do that in a way that aligns with our values and our institutional missions. But we also have to leverage that creativity and flexibility to continue to demonstrate our relevance. If technology is going to be instrumental in education in the future, then how are traditional residential institutions going to incorporate that technology, that virtual component or hybrid component to meet the needs of a changing demography of college-bound students? And I think that applies to, as Judd's alluded, to the fraternal organizations as well. I think it's really reaching a balance between that history, tradition, and then flexibility and future orientation.
I think exactly what Adam's saying is, let me put it in my perspective. There's still going to be a home for the fraternity experience where you go to, in my case, Iowa State, and you join and you have a great experience. But that is so limiting in the potential reach of the value of fraternity in society that we're going to have two tracks, which is the track that has gotten us to this point, which is grounded in tradition, and which has largely been a very big positive in all of our lives. But fraternities are also going to have to simultaneously figure out how not to solely rely on a window of time, which is basically a freshman, sophomore year to get members to join and then have them be members for another 12 to 30 months, right? That is such a small window of existence that it's really too delicate. We're going to have to figure out how to grow our experience, which will be different, in two different paths. And so the fraternities that can figure out how to do that and grow beyond the college experience are going to be the ones that really have a great platform for the future. And that's where I think we're going to, just like, shopping malls will still maybe be around a little bit more. We're going to have to figure out how to do the Amazon side of fraternity, which is less about the mall retail experience and more about the experience you create in other forums. And that has a huge potential of reach.
Thanks, Judd. And I think in closing, kind of pulling all of that together in Phi Kappa Psi, over the past 12 months, we've definitely faced challenges that for many of us, we never thought we would see. And the one thing that stood out to me more than anything is the resilience of our members. And I think it speaks not only to our organization, but society in general, and our desire to continue to move forward and to continue to progress and continue to find ways to do the things that are necessary in order for us to have fulfilling and successful lives. And I'm very proud of the effort that has been put forth by our undergraduate members and our volunteers who have really just changed the face of our organization and how we look at communications and how we look at operations in light of some of the things that Andrew and Judd talked about, years and years of tradition. And, we walked into something where we didn't have a framework or we didn't have a blueprint on what we should be doing. And we've just done extraordinary things. And my hope is that we can really take this opportunity to begin looking forward and understanding that we've broken the mold. So where do we need to avoid going back to it? Where can we take this opportunity to move the fraternity forward and really become a partner and more of a partner with our host institutions on campuses to ensure that not only is fraternity ensuring that fraternity lives on, but the fraternity is ensuring that the experience in higher education on the college campus is enhanced and benefited by our presence. And I think those things will really ensure that the life of Phi Kappa Psi and all fraternities and our partners on campus can be successful for years and years to come. I would like to thank Andrew Jones and Judd Horace for joining us today for our panel. We're so excited to begin these dialogues, and my hope is that we can continue them after our Founders Day week, because it's education and understanding the circumstances and the experiences that we're having, not only within our fraternity houses, but in university administration and on the national level of fraternities, or international, I should say, and how we're responding to those things that are going to make us a better organization and give us an opportunity to succeed moving forward. So from all of us here at Phi Kappa Psi headquarters, I would like to thank you for joining us this evening and hope that you will join us for our philanthropy panel and that's coming up. And we'll look forward to talking to you all soon. So thanks a lot and have a great evening.